pause. I want you to start recording. There we go. So what makes this entire equation work then is if you have your nominal variable on the top, your nominal includes both price and quantity changes. The consumer price index, we now know, is a measure of price level changes. So if you go in and you divide that out, the P's actually cancel. And so all you get is the change in quantity, which is all we were looking for in the first place, because in a real variable situation, prices over time are remaining constant, while you only want to go in and have the changes in the quantity. So that's why that particular equation works the way it does. It's a very nice way of going in and adjusting for those average prices. So we did one in class last time where we went in and actually just took a number for nominal gross domestic product and simply did the calculation to get it into real gross domestic product. And then we said you can only go in and you can only compare real values that have the same base year. So I went in, the second example that we did was that we had an individual that was going in and consuming beer. The first year, the individual spent $90 on beer. The second time period, I don't remember what year that was, but they went in and spent $110 on beer. So the question was, did they consume more beer? And the answer was, with the numbers we have, we don't know, because those are nominal numbers. So what we had to do was go in and actually change both of those values from their nominal over into their real variable. And what we found was, in that particular case, this person did not consume one beer more than they did the previous time period, which means that the only way we can explain that increase in spending is because of the increase in the price of beer itself. All right, so that was the second one we did. Now, I want to do one more before I go in and cut you loose on that worksheet, going in and dealing with the calculation of the real variables, because all of these are done pretty much the same way. In this one, though, we're going to go out and we're going to look at what we call the real wage. I probably have made this statement before, that I really like talking to older people in the economy. Actually, right now there's been, unfortunately, a drought of that. Right, with the COVID thing, you can't get close to a lot of people anymore, and so I'm kind of missing out on that. But I like to talk to the older people because you just really can't have an appreciation of what is going on today unless you can hear what was going on 50 60 years ago, whatever. You just can't have an appreciation of how good we have it today. But something struck me a while back when I was talking to an elderly gentleman, and he made this statement to me. He said, I feel sorry for you younger people today. Thinking, why? Of all the things, all the conveniences we have, why would you feel sorry for me? He made the statement that, he says, you make a lot more money than what I used to. His working lifetime would have been, the peak of it would have been back during the 1950s, 1960s, right? Somewhere right around in there. He said, you make a lot more money than what I used to. But he said, it just doesn't seem like your money goes as far as it used to. It just doesn't buy as much as it used to. And I thought that was a brilliant insight by him. He didn't put the math to it, right, or anything else, but he just had in his mind that, hey, paychecks are going up, you make a lot more money, but I just don't feel like you're much better off than what I used to be. So after that conversation, I actually went back and I actually did the math to see, am I really better off than he was back in the 1950s, 60s or not? So 1984 is going to be equal to 100, right? That allows us to use that sheet of numbers that you have. And so I actually went out and I gathered nominal wages for 2 years. So for 1964, the nominal wage was equal to $2.50 per hour. But by the time we got to the year 2012, that nominal wage had gone all the way up to $19.57 per hour. So I want you to think about this for a second. Back in 1964, when that person was getting their paycheck, on average, to get that amount of money, you would have taken $2.50 per hour times 50 or 40 hours per week times 52 weeks out of the year. So if you look at that, that paycheck isn't very large compared to if you took 1957 times 40 hours a week times 52 weeks out of the year. The amount of this paycheck is going to be a whole lot more than it was back in 1964. By the way, the nominal difference in these two, paychecks were going up, wages were going up by about $17.07 per hour. So the idea is people look at this and assume that they are $17 better off than they were back in 1964. So the question is that really the case? Well, the only way that we can really tell whether that's the case is to not look at the nominal values. We have to look at the real wages, which is going to tell us what the purchasing power of that money is. So we are going to go in and calculate that's wrong. We're going to go in and calculate the real wage. And this is what I want you to do on that separate sheet of paper. I want you to calculate the real wage for 1964. I want you to compare that to the real wage in the year 2012. And then tell me, are we better off or are we worse off, and by how much? Calculate the real wage for 1964, the real wage for 2012, and then tell me, are we better off, worse off, and by how much? I'll give you 10 seconds. And worse off. Right. Now remember, we did two examples like this last time. When you're going in and you're calculating a real variable, your real variable X is equal to your nominal variable X divided by the appropriate consumer price index multiplied by 100. Right, so when you're changing from a nominal to a real, it is always nominal divided by CPI. That looks correct. Yes, yes. Yes, okay. So here, we ended up here. So you better look at this. Oh, okay. Just have to get that to you. That is exactly right. Right. Okay. So, this is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like.
Yeah, 0.06, yeah.
Okay.
About
Because this is dollars and cents.
Oh, okay. 8.6.
Right. Or 8.06 dollars and 6 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, $8
I'll
and
stay
6
here.
cents. Okay, so are you better off or worse off? Better off. So take the difference between the two, you're better off. We're 45 and 46. Right. But you put that, so put that on there.
Okay.
Because I want to, and that's what you're going to have to do on these worksheets. Tell me specifically how much better off or worse off are you? So take the difference between the two. That's perfect. Better off or worse off?
44.
Worse.
So you were making,
Or you can buy more.
you can buy
So that's
more, so you're
worse.
better off. So take the difference between the two. Yep. So you're better off by 46 cents per hour.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. You got it. Am I good? Very good. Now. Are you better off or worse off? Better. By how much?
Oh.
Right. Yeah, take the difference between the two. Yeah, you got it. Okay, those numbers are correct. So you'd be better off or worse off? And by how much?
Oh, it is
Yeah.
36.
Yes, you got it. So. Better off or worse off? Yeah, better. On this two bills. Now you got it. That's exactly right. Yes. You got it. That is correct. Now, you want to come here to here, better off or worse off? How much? Take the difference. Yes. This is correct. This number from, yes. Very good, okay. Good, 46.
Oh, no.
Okay, yeah, so went
Oh,
from
I
here
did.
to-
Okay, I
you
just
take
said
the difference
opposite,
between the two.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, so in this one then, I think I didn't check everybody's, but we're all on the right track. So if you go in, you use that formula, then your real wage is going to be equal to your nominal wage in 1964, which was $2.50 per hour, divided by the consumer price index in 1964, which was what number? 31. All right, does everybody see where that number came from? And then multiply that by 100. So what was your real wage in 1964? $8.06. All right, very good. Now we have to go in and adjust for the 2012 number. So the real wage in 2012 would be your nominal wage in 2012, which is what number? $19.57, right? That's what people's paychecks actually were. Divided by the consumer price index in 2012, which was what? 229.6. So 229, well, that's wrong, 229.6 multiplied by 100. All right, so what number did you get for the real wage in 2012? $8 and what?
52 cents.
What is it? 52. $8.52. Okay, did everybody get that?
Yep.
Okay, there we go. Now, looking at those numbers, are you better off or worse off? You're better off. You were making $8.06 real wage in 2064. Now you're making $8.52 in 2012. But you're not better off by $17 an hour, are you? How much are you better by? 46 cents per hour.
I did just realize the number of years between 1964 and 2012 is also 46.
Is it really?
Mhm.
I didn't even notice that.
So we were.
So we're gaining about a penny a year, if that's right. I mean, if that we're actually gaining purchasing power of about a penny per year. So that's an interesting result. I didn't even see that part. So the point is, and we're going to see this again here in just a little bit. When you go in and you're looking at, a lot of people just tend to look at the nominal value. Is my paycheck going up? Do I have more money in my hand, right? What have you? That's not what we care about. What we care about is how much more purchasing power does that money actually have? Okay, so put your names on that. I'll collect that before I leave today. All right, so these are the types of problems that you are going to have to do on that calculating the real variables worksheet. That worksheet is going to be due on Friday. Is everybody listening closely? That worksheet is going to be due on Friday. It's the one up at the top. It says calculating real variables worksheet. Does anybody need a copy of this?
Sure.
Calculating real variables worksheet. They're on $5.
And this, and your hand down and
I don't think you gave us that one yet.
You didn't give us that one.
Oh, did I not give you this one? Oh.
You gave us.
Yeah, we
You
got
gave
it.
us the calculating CIP or
I was
CPI.
stuck $5 from everybody. Hey, I'm in the problem. Right down this one somewhere. That's right. So on this worksheet then, I want you to follow exactly what we've been doing in the last three examples. Going in and using the formula for the real variable X is equal to nominal variable X divided by the appropriate consumer price index multiplied by 100. And now everybody also has a copy of the CPI numbers. Is that correct? Because you're going to be using those on this worksheet as well. That would probably be the case, and I'll show you why that is in just a moment. That may make a little bit more sense. Yes. Okay, everybody get a copy of this. Now, normally I tell you to do this kind of stuff on a separate sheet of paper because I want you to keep the worksheet. Not on this one. I want you to do your work right on this worksheet, and it will be due at the beginning of class on Friday. Folks, listen carefully. I want you to walk in the door with this done. All right, because if I go in and I'm ready to collect it, if it's not in my hands, when I've collected everybody else's, it's an automatic zero. All right, so be working on this between now and then. I don't want anybody finishing it up, sitting here, putting down something on a piece of paper just to hand it in to try to get a couple points. We're not doing that. All right, so work on this, have it done. If you have any questions between now and then, make sure you go back to your notes. They cover this in the book. If all else fails, email me and we will Zoom together, right? And we will go in and we'll try to work this out. But again, do not wait till the last minute because I don't want to be answering questions 2 minutes before class starts, right? So you should be well past that stage before you walk in the door on Friday. Okay, that being said, let's go ahead then and let's move on and talk about the idea of what we call inflation. Now, I've been very careful so far not to go in and use the I word, right, if you will, right? I've been very careful to go in and actually go in and talk about this thing in terms of the average level of prices, because that's exactly what we're talking about here. And the reason I haven't used the word inflation is because there's already a negative connotation that goes along with this particular word. But hopefully so far now that we've gotten past that, hopefully that word inflation is not going to bother anybody. Inflation is actually a sustained increase in the average level of prices. It's a sustained increase in the average level of prices. So when you go in and you start talking about inflation, I've even seen some books go in and talk about what a dollar is worth. You know, and I'm not exactly sure that I care for that particular terminology. Because when I look at a dollar, what's a dollar worth? Well, 4 quarters, 10 dimes, 20 nickels, 100 pennies, right? I'm more concerned about what that dollar will actually buy, right? What its purchasing power actually is. So from now on, that's what we're going to be talking in terms of purchasing power. The purchasing power of money. Now, purchasing power is influenced by or is some function of the average level of prices. All right, the purchasing power is some function of the average level of prices. So what that means is if you're going in and you're talking about inflation, inflation basically means that prices in the economy are in fact increasing. And so if prices are going up, that means that every dollar you have in your pocket will not buy as many goods and services as it did before, which means that the purchasing power of your money is actually declining over time. Now, a lot of people will look at that and say, well, that is a bad thing, right? Well, not necessarily, because if you go back and you remember our major goals of economics, we said we wanted price stability. But then I asked the question, does that mean we never want prices to increase in the economy? And we said, no. In fact, that's not true. In fact, the goal that we're actually looking for in the economy is to have prices going up by 2% per year. So we do actually want sustained inflation in the overall economy. We just want to go in and make sure it is controlled. Right? And in fact, if you go in and you start looking at the inflationary record of the United States, it actually turns out the United States has not done too terribly bad in going out and keeping these prices relatively stable. By the way, this is the consumer price index for a very long period of time. This one goes all the way back to 1800. So 1800 through the year 2006. What's our base year? 1984, right? It's right up there in front of you. 1984 is equal to 100.
Do you think we'll come to like a Kansas society like in the next 10 years or that? Because the value of the dollar is going down. Like
And it has, in fact, hold that thought for just a second. When you go in and you start looking at these prices, there's a couple of things I want you to notice about this graph. First of all, if you drew a trend line from 1800 all the way through, let's go to about 1940, right, which would be about right in here. If you do a trend line through that, what is the trend of average prices?
Starting to go up.
But, well, I mean, on the long term, you know what I'm saying? On the long term, it's a flat line, right, going all the way across. Now, when you go in and you see these little humps right here, there's one right here in the latter part of the 1810s. Here's the Civil War, by the way, right? There was quite a bit of inflation during that period of time. And here's the Industrial Revolution of the 1920s. But I want you to note that every time prices went up, they came right back down after that event actually happened. So if you draw a long-term trend line through this, it may have a little bit of an upward slope, but for the most part, that sucker is really, really flat. But what you start to notice is in the early part of the 1940s, what starts to happen to that trend line?
Going up.
It starts to go up. And then by the time we get to the 1970s, what happens? Then it really starts, right, to increase after that. So what we find is that everybody alive today has been in a state of inflationary pressure. In fact, if you go here to 1913, all the way through the early part of the 2000s, guys, we are always living in a state of inflation. It's just a matter of how much inflation is there in our economy. So we're used to living with it. I'm not exactly sure why, other than politically speaking, when you go in and you use the term inflation, it kind of gets a bad rap, right? But we are always in a state of inflationary pressure. Actually, as it turns out, the United States, even though it has that big upward trend, the United States really hasn't done a bad job keeping a handle on these average level of prices. In fact, the worst period of time that the United States has actually seen was back during the 1970s. During that period of time, we experienced inflation anywhere between 9 and 12% per year. 9 and 12% per year. Clearly, if our goal is 2%, that's way, way over the goal. I will tell you, I was very young, right, when that was going on. But I can still remember the discussions around the dining room table. My mom would say that groceries were going up and how fast those groceries were going up. My dad's wage was not going up. And so what was happening is the money that everybody had, simply at 9 to 12%, it was hurting average families really, really bad during that period of time. What we have also seen is from the 1970s, now that the Federal Reserve has really gotten involved in this, is that we have not had another bout of inflation that is nearly close to being that. So we've been right in that goal of about 2% per year. However, there are some other economies, even when you look at the 9 to 12%, compared to some other economies, the United States has actually done pretty well. One of the poster childs for this, what we call hyperinflation in the world, actually came out of Argentina. Back during the 1990s. In Argentina, between 1992 and 1997, they experienced 4 million% inflation. 4 million% inflation. All right. Now, if you look at this, it's not funny, but it's Argentina, right? And so if you go and you look at this, you say that, how in the world do you wrap your minds around this, right? What exactly does that mean? I believe in 1990, in the early part of the 1990s, Argentina was using the lira. And so, we don't want to get into foreign currencies, but put it in terms of the US dollar. What this means is if you were to buy a candy bar for $1 in 1992, that means that by the time you got to 1997, that same candy bar would cost you $4 million. All right, so again, how do you wrap your mind around that? How in the world do you pay $4 million for a candy bar? Well, as it turns out, Argentina fell in the trap that a lot of other economies had already done. They were in a pretty good recession in the early part of the 1990s, and economies found out a long time ago that all they have to do is print a lot of money, throw that money out into the economy, people will start spending it, and the economy is going to show economic growth. It works very, very well. What no one has figured out so far is once you put that money out there, how do you bring it back out of the economy without doing some serious damage, right? No one has figured that out. But the one thing that Argentina did that no other economy had done up until that point in time is that they redenominated their currency 5 times, right, during this entire thing. What that means is, and again, I'm going to put it in terms of the US dollar. Right now, we're used to seeing the $1, the $5, the 10, the 20. If you're lucky, every now and then you see the 50, and then you have the drug dealers that have the 100s. All right. So there's it. By the way, I say that. If anybody has seen the studies that have come out, with the money is actually really dirty, right? As it turns out, about 90% of $20 bills have traces amounts of cocaine on them. Right, even after they go through the Federal Reserve and get repatriated. And it's almost 100% of the 50s and 100s. Which, by the way, explains that if you see me in Arby's with my $20 bill before I hand it over, I'm rubbing it, licking it, doing whatever, before you hand it over, because I don't want to give anything away. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, yeah, just make sure, right? Yeah, so if I'm looking really happy eating my Arby's burger, you know what happened. Okay, anyway, so let's say that right now, that's the currency that we actually have. What Argentina did was print all this currency in massive amounts. They threw it out into their economy. Prices went up, purchasing power of that money went down. To the point that the $1 and the $5 bill simply was worthless. Nobody wanted it. It's like going in today. By the way, how many of you, if you're walking across the street and you see a penny lying on the ground, how many of you stop to pick it up? Probably a couple people. Why don't the rest of you?
I flip it over if it's on tails.
I'm sorry?
I flip it over if it's on tails to let someone else pick it up. Because I think that if you pick up a penny when it's on tails, it's bad luck. So then if I see one on the ground, I flip it over for the next person to pick it up.
You're very nice.
So they have.
So you're controlling your destiny.
What? Have you heard about this?
No, I'm sorry. If you could see the look on my mouth. No, I'm sorry. I have never heard that before. So if you pick up a penny and it's on tails,
It's bad.
it's bad luck.
If it's on heads,
If it's on heads, it's good luck.
Yeah.
You guys have this problem okay, all right. Is that true with the nickel or a quarter or?
no.
So you're telling me if you're walking across the street, there's a $50 bill that is face down, that's bad luck.
It's only pennies.
It's
I'm
Like,
not thinking.
It's only
Yes,
pennies.
it's pennies.
like a penny on heads is good
No,
luck.
that's awful.
Oh, now somebody back here is, okay.
I guarantee you, boss you a $100 bill, so no, I'm
Hey, I don't
saying.
care. I don't care whether that sucker's folded or whatever. I mean,
Just pick it up.
twisted looking both ways. I'm gonna pick that sucker up. You know what I'm saying? Okay, no, I've never heard that before. All right. So anyway, most of you don't pick up the penny. Why? Because it's worthless, right? Why would you? How many of you does it take a nickel for you to stop and pick it up? Not really?
Quarter.
A quarter, right? And so on. Yeah. Used to be though, if you talk to an elderly person, if they saw a nickel lying on the ground, they'd fight you for it back in the 1960s, right? Because the nickel would actually buy something back in the 1960s. We have gone to the point where prices have gone up so much that the purchasing power of the penny, actually, believe it or not, there's been talk recently, Canada has already done this, by the way. They've gotten rid of the penny, right? Because it actually cost more to mint a penny than the purchasing power that it has, right? And so it actually costs the government money to have pennies. So the purchasing power is so low, it's absolutely worthless. Point is this, what they did with their currency was the $1 and the $5 became absolutely worthless. Nobody wanted it. But because prices were so high, they needed larger denominations to carry out those prices. So they took out the $1 and the $5 bill, but they put in a $500 and a $1,000 bill at the end of it. What they didn't understand, I guess, was it doesn't matter whether you print up $1,000 bill, that's wrong, $1,001 bills or one $1,000 bill, you've increased your money supply, right? I mean, it just doesn't matter what the denomination actually is. So they put the higher dollar values out there. People spent the money, prices go up, purchasing power goes down until the 20 or the 10 and the 20 have no purchasing power whatsoever. So they took those out of circulation and went in and put in a $10,000 and a $50,000 bill on the end of that, and so on and so forth. They did that 5 times before they realized this ain't working, our economy is trashed. And by the way, there was an individual that I've talked to. He was down in Argentina during this period of time, doing some consulting work for Boeing Aircraft. He actually said if you were to go into a restaurant in Argentina, the menu would be printed outside on a chalkboard and the prices would be in chalk. And they would update the price of the meals by the hour. That's how fast prices of meat, bread, cheese, and all that was going up in this economy. So it's perfectly plausible that you could walk into that restaurant and order a cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke for $2.5 million, right? And by the time, if you ate it slow enough, right, by the time you actually left, it would cost you $2.75 million by the time the meal was finished. And so prices, in fact, by 1997, some unions were demanding that their workers be paid 2 times per day, because the idea was if you made $1 at 9 o'clock in the morning, but they didn't give you that $1 until 5 o'clock in the evening, prices had gone up so much, the purchasing power of that money had gone down, that it was worthless. And so they went in, they got half their pay at noon, they spent it as quickly as they could. They got the rest of it at 5 o'clock. They spent it as quickly as they could while it still had any a semblance of purchasing power whatsoever. So their economy was completely and utterly trashed. So they finally got out of this. It wasn't pretty. They ended up taking all of these higher denominations out of circulation. They redenominated it back down to where it should have been in the first place. And then they tied their currency inflation rate to the United States Consumer Price Index. So as it turns out, if our consumer price index shows that our prices increased by $2% this year, their currency only inflates by 2%. So actually that shows that we as the United States have actually been doing very, very well on keeping a lid on this inflation, because other countries are actually willing to tie their currency inflation rates to our consumer price index. Right? So there's one of the horror stories. They're the first one again to go in and redenominate this. But you know something, and what is interesting about watching all these economies and things like this work is that no matter how bad Argentina got, there's always someone that didn't get the word, right? There's always someone who didn't go in and read that chapter in the textbook. And the latest situation, this is actually still going on today, is in Zimbabwe, right? Of all places, Zimbabwe. They went out, they did exactly the same thing that Argentina did. They went out, they started redenominating their currency and so on and so forth, to the point that absolutely no one in the world, but people who collect currency, want their currency because it's absolutely meaningless. I actually have here real Zimbabwean currency. I'm not going to pass it around, but if you want to, you can come up afterwards and look at it. It's a beautiful currency. Here is a $500 million bill. $500 million. And if you look at it, they've gone to a large extreme. In fact, this currency is actually more secure than the US dollar for a number of different reasons. The color schemes on it, it's much, much harder to print these patterns on even a laser jet printer. You cannot reproduce these patterns exactly. If you go in and you hold it up to the light, and if you do this with your currency, they have the shadow image like we do. It's built into the paper. They have the polyester strip, right, which we have in ours. But something that we still do not have is this embedded watermark. So everybody see it kind of down at the bottom down here? This embedded watermark. You cannot go in and you cannot reproduce this on a color copier. It is impossible to do. And so they've gone to great lengths to go in and secure a currency that absolutely no value to it whatsoever. All right, so here's a $500 million bill.
How much is that in dollars?
Hold that thought for a second. Yeah, here is a $1 billion bill. I really like this one with the elephant on the back. You know, they're really, yeah, they got their symbols on the back and all that. So I like the elephant. Here is a $10 trillion bill. Here is the $50 trillion bill. Again, there's the elephant, like the elephant. Right? And then here's my favorite, a $100 trillion bill. You got to like the water buffalo on the back. I kind of like the blue too. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So there's a water buffalo. All right. So the 100 trillion, look at the zeros. All right. $100 trillion bill. Anybody want to hazard a guess on how much I paid for this currency with shipping?
$15.
$10, $5.
I paid $12 for it with shipping. $12.
How much shipping?
And it wasn't much, 50 cents, $1, right? Something like that. I mean, it wasn't much. So the currency itself at the time was worth about $10, right? Just about $10. So if you carry this into Zimbabwe, you have nothing. You basically have nothing. You walk into Zimbabwe with a $100 US bill and they will elect you president. You know what I'm saying? Because that is something that they want. It is something that actually has value. So Argentina, while I make fun of them, they didn't do it upright like Zimbabwe did, right? And they still haven't got themselves out of it. It's still a problem today. All right, so we got to be very vigilant of this entire thing. And it seems if you look at that CPI paper and look at those percentage changes year to year, it seems like the United States since the 1970s has actually been doing a fairly good job of that. All right, now, calculating real variables worksheet. Are there any questions over that? And that sucker is due the very first on Friday. Don't wait till the last minute. Show all of your work. If you do nothing but give me numbers, it's an automatic zero whether it's right or not. I want to see the numbers. I want to go your calculations. I want to be able to follow your work on the way through. All right, get out of here. Work hard, study often, and always remember from both ago. That paper, the real wage, leave it on the desk. I'll pick it up on my way out. Make sure your name is on.
Mr. Is it all right if we were going to separate a paper and speak back?
Yeah,
Run it around.
that'd be okay. Yeah, just meet downstairs as well. Yeah.
Figure mo ba na
I like this one.
internet of the last
That moment when you have $1 million billing.